I don't really know how we're going to do this. This is going to be a great time, but me and Caleb, we're sitting here before the podcast going, what the hell are we going to talk about? And then it popped into our brains. The disappointment we have felt watching players like Huberdeau, like Dubois play all season long and just absolutely shit the bed on their $1 million contracts. Let's talk about it. Let's have a bit of a therapy session here for all of the teams, all fan bases to come together and complain about your most disappointing players, which is what we're going to talk about. I have a list in front of me made by Bleacher Report and Adam Gretz back on May 2nd. This is one that we have had sitting in the bench for about a week now. We thought about doing it last week, didn't end up doing it, so we're doing it here now. We're not going to do every team because that's a lot of people, and a lot of these aren't really worth talking about. We were kind of talking about it before. Caleb, you pitched the idea of giving every player kind of like a minute and giving it kind of just a speed run at it. The hard part with something like that is just the fact that, and it's the same thing I said to you, some of these players are worth talking about for quite a bit longer than a minute, and some of these really aren't. Some of these aren't even worth giving a minute to. So I'm going to kind of toss us all over the place here, I think. We're going to skip a few that they've got on this list, but we're going to start at the top anyway, because I think they do start with a really big one in the Anaheim Ducks and Trevor Zegras, which is a big one people have talked about plenty. Mainly because of the fact that, sure, he was hurt for a lot of the year, but even when he was playing, he just wasn't very good. And whether that's because he was playing hurt, whether that's just coming off injuries, are always tough, especially for younger players like Trevor Zegras. I think something that we can maybe talk about, throw it in there, make a prediction out of it. Caleb, if I'm going to toss it over to you before I even ask what you think about his kind of drop in production, do you think that there's a chance Trevor Zegras will turn things around next year? Or if this is just the player he is?
I think so.
Okay.
He's 23 years old, right? Like, I think the talent is still there. He's one of the most electrifying players that we had seen in a long time. I find it hard to believe that that's just a flash in the pan. Like you said, he's injured. He only played 31 games this year. So, like, didn't have much of a chance to prove himself. Like, players go through rough patches. And like you pointed out, if he's playing hurt for some of that stretch, it could explain the lack of production too. I just think you don't knock a kid like that at this point in his career. Yeah, it was a disappointing season, but it's not something where I'm like overly concerned about his growth into a star like his projection were. It's disappointing, but I think there's a lot of other factors that can explain it to where I'm not overly concerned about like a huge drop off.
Yeah, and I think I have the same answer as well. I have never been a big fan of him. I've always thought he was a little overhyped, but that's not to say that I don't think he'll be a good player and a lot better of a player than he is here. I still think he has all the potential in the world to be point per game, and he has showed that many times. There's a lot of people who have expected a lot more than him from him in like evolving into a superstar. I got distracted because I saw two Santas sitting in the back of this photo, and it made me giggle a little bit in my head. If you look really, really close in this photo I have of Zegras on the screen, you can just see Santa. It got me very confused for half a second. Anyway, there's a lot of people who hyped him up to be this superstar player, which, I mean, the main point I'm trying to make, he's probably not going to be that. He makes electrifying plays like you've mentioned, like we've seen, like he was in that photo, right? He took that lacrosse move and made it his thing. That is the Trevor Zegras move at this point, right? I just don't think you can expect him to be, he's never going to be, if the Ducks start winning, he will not be the best player on that team, is the main point I would make. I don't think he's that superstar player. I don't think he has the potential to do that, but I do think he's a lot better than he is right now, and I do think he's going to turn that around. But I think we can move on. Yeah. I think it's pretty clear both of us, like I mentioned, both higher on Trevor Zegras than he has shown this year. He'll turn it around. I think we can skip all the way down over to the Buffalo Sabres, who they have on this list as Peyton Krebs, who, honestly, I have not followed his season very much this year, but the fact that we haven't been hearing much about him, I think, says more than anything else. Because if you really want to talk about the prospect that Peyton Krebs was at one point, he was a very, very big part of that Jack Eichel trade that sent him to Vegas, and obviously Krebs coming the other way in that trade. He was a very big prospect at one point, and so far he's made the NHL, and he's become a very okay player, but he's not what anybody thought he would be so far last season, this season, whatever. He scored 4 goals, 17 total points in 80 games. Not great.
Yeah.
Not great. And he's still young. He's 23 as of right now. And yeah, I think this is one that's a bit more interesting than the Zegras one, to ask the question of whether you think he's going to turn it around. I really hope he does. I was a big fan of his game when he was a prospect, but I'll throw it over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think this whole Buffalo roster is kind of one that's full of disappointments, right? Again, I can't specifically speak a lot to Krebs in terms of watching a lot of his game the last season, but in terms of just production, like I almost look at I could look about 7 different ways at this roster. This is a team that we were looking at potentially making the playoffs before the year, breaking their years-long curse, and didn't even come close to that. It's guys like Krebs not stepping up, but it's also like I'm honestly surprised they didn't go with a guy like Tage Thompson in this spot either, where he was projected to be that like superstar player, but did not make that kind of leap. 59 points in 71 games.
Hell,
Even I don't necessarily
Levi.
the most. Devin Levi as well. Although that one I think it was more of a one I'd chalk up to his first season in the NHL.
Oh no, and I agree with you. That's not me saying that I'm necessarily fully disappointed in it. I'm throwing him out there because of the hype behind Levi at one point. He was the biggest goalie prospect in the world, right? And there was a lot of excitement going into maybe more into the back end of the season than the start of the next one, if that makes more sense. I think it cooled down over the summer, but the hype around him was definitely there. And I think it's the same thing with Tage Thompson. Absolutely. That's another really good point. Because, yeah, this whole Buffalo team, I remember being very, very high on them at the beginning of the year for good reason. They have so much talent. They have so many very, very skilled young guys that really should have turned it around for them and just haven't yet.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. It's definitely one of the ones where it's like you look back on, if you just rewatch our preview of it, just contrasting that with where we are now, it's just I don't know. Peyton Krebs is the scapegoat here in terms of this Bleacher Report article, but it goes way deeper than that.
Oh, absolutely. And here's the fun one that I think we'll spend a little bit talking about, because this is the player from both of our teams in Jonathan Huberdeau, and it's the obvious one. When I read this headline, I was trying to figure out what the heck you were pointing at for a second there, but but when I read this headline, I thought Jonathan Huberdeau. He is the big name when it comes to this, because the Flames are paying him a ridiculous amount of money in $84 million over 8 seasons, and so far he has basically done jack all. If you, in a sense, he was, and say what you want about obviously the fact that he was in reality traded for Tkachuk, but in my head, and I think in a lot of Flames fans' heads, he was the Jonathan Gaudreau. Johnny Gaudreau. Jonathan. I was like, I don't know. I had like a brain cramp. I know. I had a brain cramp, and I thought about it for a second, and then I said it
that long.
I know.
Don't have to refer to him formally.
I know.
Jonathan Gaudreau.
Sir Jonathan. I had like a brain cramp where I said it, and I went, that sounds wrong. And then I said it again. I was like, no, that sounds right. It's because we're talking about Jonathan Huberdeau. Whatever. It's too many Johns. Screw off, Johns.
Johnny Huberdeau.
We need to get all the Johns out of Calgary. Start a petition. Anyway, what I was going to say is maybe
Huberdeau needs to change his name to Johnny.
Oh, there we go. That might do the trick. That might do
Johnny
the trick.
Huberdeau. Johnny Hubie.
Johnny Hubie. That does have a ring to it. Start that petition as well. Start both of them at the same time. But anyway, what I was going to say is, in a sense, he was the Johnny Gaudreau replacement, at least to a lot of Flames fans going into that first season he was here. He wasn't that at all. This season, he was arguably worse if you really look at the stats, which says a lot, because he was really bad in that first year. I'd say he was less noticeable this season than he was in that first one, but he was... That's mostly because we got a lot more talented, I think, this year, especially in youth. There was a lot of things to look at other than I nearly said it again. Jonathan Huberdeau. Too many fucking Johnnies, man. There was a lot more things to look at on the ice, at least for us Flames fans. But, I mean, Do you think there's a chance that we will ever see the Jonathan Huberdeau of old? The Florida Panthers Jonathan. The Jonathan we
Well,
all
I
need.
don't know. That feels like, because I mean, I think the one knock against Huberdeau in Florida was that he was playing with
Yeah.
fantastic line mates, right? And particularly Barkov,
Oh yeah.
where it's like
Well,
he doesn't necessarily, and he's more of an like a setup, like he's not going to be scoring a ton of goals generally. His skill is in passing, and
he
he
had a
needs
30
a
goal year.
superstar beside him to yeah, still even then, like I think generally like he's there to set up other players. I don't think he can survive. As we've kind of learned, I don't think he can survive as the sole superstar on his team.
No.
I think he needs that other presence, and I mean, I don't know if that's I do think, again, I didn't watch the Flames as closely as I normally did this year,
For fair
but
reason.
from what I generally saw, from what I generally saw over the course of the season, was that Huberdeau played better when
Yeah.
he was put on a line with some of the up and coming young talent.
Just gonna
And I
say.
almost think that that's um, indicative of how it would go. And I think if he does ever have a bounce back season, it's because another player has broken out and become a superstar on the Flames, whether
Yeah.
that's one of the young prospects we have here or someone we pick in an upcoming draft.
And
I think that's the big thing there.
to add on to that, I think what we've learned about Huberdeau more than anything else is that he, at least to me, he's the type of player who needs to be the second best player on his line. He is, and in
Yeah,
my head, I compare it, and I think the comparison is a good one here because he had, at least in Florida, he would have had a very very similar role to this player. He's kind of your Nicholas Backstrom. You would never think of Nicholas
yeah,
Backstrom as that superstar who can carry his own team and be that number one guy, but he was perfect to play on a line with Ovechkin, right? It's the same thing here, where he was perfect when he wasn't the number one threat. Huberdeau was lethal when he was passing to Barkov, when he was passing to whoever the fuck they put on that line. And it worked. It worked perfectly. It was very, very good because he wasn't the number one guy on that line. People were scared of Barkov. When you're a defenseman on the ice and you're playing against Barkov, you're playing against Huberdeau, and they're in a power play or whatever the heck the situation is, you're not necessarily watching Huberdeau. He's the pass guy. He's the guy who's just there to pass it. You're watching Barkov, and that is when Huberdeau succeeds. When he is not the main focus. And the whole time he's been in Calgary, he's been the main focus. Whether that be in the media, whether that be on the ice, people it is a
and
completely different situation for him, and he's struggled.
it's the yeah, it's the pressure of A, living up to the contract, B, living up to the Kachuk trade, which I think is a big thing. Because I think, especially with the season that Kachuk had in Florida, taking them all the way to the Cup Finals. And Kachuk was, I think, I think losing Kachuk was when this team died, frankly.
Yeah.
Because Kachuk was the heart and soul of this team, where he would go out and fight every night, and even if the rest of the team was coming out
Can't
there
be a
and saying
party
like,
every
"Oh,
night, Caleb.
riot every night," yeah, garbage. Like he would be the one who like lived and died for this team, and to the point where he eventually had enough and said, I need out of here." I think that's when this team died, and Huberdeau could never match that. Like I don't think Huberdeau, like pound for pound, could never match the type of player
No.
Kachuk is, both in terms of skill, but most importantly, intensity and leadership.
And it's
It's a crime,
crazy.
like it's a crime that Kachuk was never captain
Yeah,
of
that's
this
true.
team. I think that's maybe not necessarily the main reason as to why Huberdeau has been disappointing, but I think it's kind of an underrated
And
like
I
storyline amongst all of
and
this.
I do want to say I think a little bit of that is looking backwards because I do remember when Huberdeau came in, that contract looked fair. He and that
Yeah,
trade for Kachuk looked
well, be-
good. And in the skill department
it
of
looked very
replacing
good,
him,
especially with Uyghur too.
yeah, in the skill department of just replacing Kachuk one for one, at least to me, it didn't look bad. I know that I was a real big fan of that trade when it happened, and now looking
I
back
was
on it,
too.
it's not very good. And
Yep.
Uyghur has obviously been very good. That is not a sentiment
I
to the player Uyghur has been. I think everybody
yeah.
involved has been very impressed with Uyghur, and he's turned into a big fan favorite
I
here
think
in Calgary.
getting
But
Uyghur, honestly, even though Huberto is like gonna sink us with the contract, I still think that's an even trade relatively, because Kachuk had made it public he wanted out. I was surprised we got
that's true.
anything for him,
Yeah,
honestly.
That's
That was the big thing. We had
very
no
true.
leverage.
Yeah. I think we should move on because we've got a lot of players on this
We could
list.
talk
That's
about
the big one.
Huberdeau forever.
Exactly. And
We
that
could talk
was
about
that
Huberdeau
was the
forever.
big one. I promise you that will be the one we talk about for the longest here. I think we're going to skip another few here in the fact just because they're not that interesting. The next one I think we should talk about is Colorado, where they have been very, very good across the board. You can talk about their offense. You can talk about their defense. The one gap they've had this season more than anything else is the man between the pipes in Alexander Georgiev. And it has been a very interesting situation for him so far in Colorado because there has been times where he's looked very good and there has been times when he looks like he should be a backup again. And so far he's been good enough for Colorado, at least in the playoffs when they were playing Winnipeg and who are they playing again? And I'm completely blanking all of a sudden. Who are they playing in the second round?
Dallas.
There you go. Whatever. And we'll see how he looks against Dallas. But
They're
this
up
is
1-0 already.
Oh, well, that shows the rock I've been living under. But
Dallas was up 3-0, and they came back to win 4-3 in overtime.
when did that game was that yesterday?
That was a couple days ago, I believe.
Oh my God, Simon! Holy, I'm on vacation. Y'all got to give me a break. I was doing everything, but I've been watching. I had to watch a lot of hockey in the last 6 months, whether for this or for work. I've watched enough hockey. I was doing anything but watching hockey for the last couple days. Whatever. Obviously, he's going to be their starter in those games, and he has been the big story, I think, with Colorado, with their teams. I don't think it would have mattered if he was an average starter. I think even that would be a bit of a letdown because of the reason Colorado brought him in for. When he was backing up Shesterkin, he looked very, very good. He looked comparable. That duo looked comparable to Swayman and Allmark. And now that is absolutely not the case at all, which is very, very interesting, at least for me. I think my question for you is whether you think that Georgiev ever really was that type of elite goalie who can be not only just a good starter, but can be that next level goalie in the regular season, playoffs, what have you. Or whether you think this is the Georgiev that he always has been, I guess is what I'm trying to say. This is
I just think it's a dangerous leap to make from projecting from backup to starter. I mean, it's something you're gonna have to do at some point, but I mean, to put all your chips in on the table on Georgiev in terms of what Colorado was doing, instead of bringing a guy up and who they've developed or bringing in a more experienced veteran like they did before in Darcy Kemper. I think there's still potential. I mean, I think he's still relatively young, is he not? There's always potential for
yes.
especially,
I don't know how old he is,
especially
but he's relatively.
Especially with goalies where it's very volatile from year to year.
Yeah.
I think that anything can change in the blink of the eye, and obviously the more experience you get, I think the better you're going to get generally. I think the one thing I would say about him being the most disappointing player in Colorado, not necessarily that I have a substitute, but I just don't know, I know the expectations were relatively high coming in based on how he looked in New York, but
yeah.
I don't know, I feel like that even was unreasonable to begin with.
And that's fair. No, you make a good point there, and just expecting him to be that next top guy, but you got to realize where the hype was, right? He was very, very much. I was a big fan of him. I can say that. I was definitely on that hype train of this guy is going to be great for the Avalanche. He's a massive upgrade, and he was good at points. But he's just he has been also very bad at points, and that's been the big thing. I do think he'll turn it around. You made a good point. He's very young, and I have the same perspective on it. NHL goalies go up and down. It's way too early to give up on them, but I think if you've learned, and if I'm Colorado, I've learned anything, especially if they go out to Dallas in this round, I think you got to look at maybe getting either a very, very good veteran backup or a player or a back veteran who could even potentially give him a run for the starting job, just to either spook him into playing better or just have that backup just in case. The next one up here is another very, very Very, very good one to talk about, I think, because it's been a story for the last 2 years, same as Huberdeau. There's been a lot of people comparing him in Sir Jonathan Gaudreau over in Columbus.
No, that's not okay. Yep.
Who did you have?
I thought we were going to get to a different player first, but
Oh yeah, well there is another comparable, but yeah, this is when you talk about the two, the two Jonathans of the league, because that is what we call them both.
two
obviously.
Johnnies.
The two Jonathans. The two Sir Jonathans. It is Johnny Gaudreau and Jonathan Huberdeau. And there's a lot of reasons to compare them. One went in, one came out, and of Calgary as that is, and both have sucked ever since. And it's been very weird with Johnny Huberdeau or Johnny.
You're cursed with this segment.
I am. I am. Holy smokes. Johnny Gaudreau. Holy crap. I need another cup of coffee.
He played here for 10 years.
I know! Oh, it's... whatever. Johnny Gaudreau has been a very interesting case, especially in the last couple of years here, because it's almost stranger than Huberdeau, because if you compare the two players, even before the drop-off, I would have told you that I would expect Gaudreau to be the player out of the two to be able to succeed on a worse team. Because when you just look at it, on who can create for themselves, who's the better scorer, all of those things, Johnny Gaudreau hits the mark. He was that guy. There was multiple seasons in a row where he was one of the best in the NHL for entering the zone with the puck, and was arguably one of maybe behind McDavid and McKinnon as the best puck carriers, period. And all of a sudden he turned into a 12-goal scorer in 2 years. And it's a very, very interesting situation where I think the only thing we can blame is Columbus and Ohio.
Yeah.
Blame Ohio. Yeah. There we go. That's the answer. Ohio ruined Johnny Gaudreau for all of us, and now we don't get to watch him dipsy doodle and dangle through the neutral zone and score on non-expecting goaltenders. We can move on. Let's just blame Ohio.
Yeah, I mean, well, I do think that's honestly it, right? In terms of, like, I think you put him anywhere else that's even a little bit better and in a little bit bigger of a market than Columbus, and I think it's really not that big of an issue. Because, I mean, his point production, while it's gone down significantly, especially from his last season with Calgary, it's still, like, he's still producing, like, the year before, almost at a point per game. This year, a little bit down, but still, like, 60 points isn't, like, terrible or anything.
Nope.
A 12-goal scorer, obviously, not ideal. But, yeah, I don't know. I think it's just completely and fully situation on this. Like,
yeah. He's also on a team that's not contending at all.
Yeah, it's still the most, like, confounding free agency decision that I think I've ever seen in any sport ever, in terms of the choice that a player made. Because Calgary loved him. Calgary was going to pay him more money. Even though Calgary hasn't been very good, I think
we all thought Calgary was going to be good. That's the difference, right?
Yeah, and I think they would have been better because you still maybe Gaudreau would have been that superstar that you could pair with Huberdeau, and maybe Huberdeau plays better, right? In terms of, like, expounding on that conversation
exactly,
we just
right?
had.
Like, I think the main difference is let's say in a magical world where Gaudreau stayed, right? We still would have made that Huberdeau trade. The only difference that I can really think of is we wouldn't have gotten Kadri, because we never would have been able to clear that cap. I think so. In a way, you could basically say Kadri in, Gaudreau, or other way around. Kadri out, Gaudreau in. That's the only thing that changes. I think that's a very different team, because Gaudreau would be coming off the best season he's ever had as a scorer and just as a passer all across the board. He'd be playing with Huberdeau, who is coming off I think also the best season he's ever had. And it's the same thing that I mentioned to you. Huberdeau can't be that number one guy. He wouldn't be. Gaudreau is that number one guy. He's the puck carrier. He's all that. I think we're and it's so crappy to think about, because then I just start banging my head against the table at what we could have had. Johnny, why you have to leave, buddy? We would have been so much better off.
It didn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't. Yeah,
Calgary paying more money, and also, like, his reasoning was to be closer to home, but, like, I believe his family was in Philly, and he didn't sign with Philly when
he wanted to.
That was on the table.
Philly shut it down. It
doesn't make any sense.
Philly shut it down. Philly came outright and said they didn't want him.
I don't remember that as much,
I
but
do.
I guess
Because
I guess if that happened, that makes more sense.
the reason I remember that is because when that happened, pretty much everyone here, I think that was our sign of like, whew, we're good. That was the one thing with Gaudreau is like he wanted to maybe go to New Jersey, he wanted to go to Philly, and Columbus was in the background, but that didn't really become as big of a storyline as until it happened, obviously. But the big story was Philly. Whether Philly was going to get him, and Philly did not want to pay the price that Johnny wanted. The only team that was really willing to pay Johnny the ridiculous amount of money he wanted, funnily enough, was Calgary. Even Columbus was a downgrade in money. And yeah, it is really, really crazy now looking at it where Johnny has basically just become, I don't know, he's become the best player. He's playing next to Line as well, who could have also made this list in looking at the player he used to be compared to what he is now. So it's yeah. Columbus as a team has been a very, very, very funky team for a little while here. I think we should try and speed up, and I think it'll be a little bit easier with the second half of this list. Ville Husso, this one, I cannot say I watched many Detroit games, but I believe it based on how bad Detroit was this year, despite my own expectations. I had them winning the cup because I got caught up on the hype train that was Detroit because they looked very, very good. And it's really, really unfortunate because the one thing I do remember saying in that segment was the fact that if they were going to become the player or the team that everybody expected them and wanted them to be, they need good goaltending. They needed Ville Husso to turn into that player he was for St. Louis for in those runs, and he wasn't at all. He really just didn't develop. He just wasn't good, and that is the unfortunate thing, I guess. I mean, so far with the Red Wings, they even have the stats here to throw them at you quick. 895 save percentage over 75 appearances in 2 years. That's just bad. Like there was
none of that is great, and I think that was the concern. I think it's similar to Georgiev, right? Where it's like projecting someone with limited starting time to be your secured number one goalie. I think that it causes an issue, right? Where it puts this extra pressure on, especially as a team that's expected to contend. There's that extra pressure that's not necessarily. I don't think it's good for a goalie's development. And I don't think it's necessarily good for the team either, right? I think I don't know where they go from here in terms of if they have, because who else do they have aside from Husso that they started this year? Because I think it means generally they have to find.
I thought they signed another guy, but I don't remember. Not as a starter.
Yeah,
they don't have anyone who
Alex
can really
Lyon?
start.
Alex Lyon.
Yes, that is it. I don't. Was he in Detroit before? I don't remember.
He was in Florida.
Oh, that's right.
He was in Florida.
Yes. Nope, you're absolutely right. Yeah, well, yeah.
Where
I guess
he basically got them in.
Yeah.
And because here's the breakdown. Actually, this is interesting in terms of Husso was immediately kind of ousted, where he only played 19 games. James Reimer played 25, and Alex Lyon played 44. And Husso played a lot worse than either of those guys. I think Lyon has proven himself to be a pretty good goalie. Obviously, the stretch with Florida, Florida wouldn't have had their run without him.
Well,
but I think you got to try to find a more permanent addition at goalie. And but again, the position is so volatile; it's hard to even know what that would look like.
I think what we've learned is Detroit does not have the defense that we once thought they had. I think there is also a conversation there because when you have three goalies show up and all suck, that's not necessarily a sign that your crease is haunted by the ghosts of goalie past. It's usually a sign that your defense is bad and your team just isn't doing a good job defending them.
But still, that isn't necessarily a good three-headed goalie tandem if you're pulling out fair. Like the 38-year-old corpse of James Reimer to start a lot of games for you.
Yeah. Well, I'd say that both Lyon and Husso have been shown to be good enough. Sure. Yeah, like they both have shown before that behind good defense, they have been good. Behind a Detroit, Jesus, I need more coffee. Behind a Detroit team that we all thought would be very good this year, all they showed us is they're not that. They can't be that starter. I think if you're Detroit, you have to be looking for potentially a new guy, or at least somebody to add to that trio. Because I
Yeah.
like you pointed out, you don't hate Lyon. You think that he's a good goalie. I don't hate Husso. I think he's shown to be a good goalie in the past. I think either of those guys in the future, if things turn around for them, could be a starter for this Detroit team. But you don't really want to run it back with the same duo that just basically lost to a year. And
Yep.
I think, yeah, yeah. No, I think it's just exactly that. I think you got to try and bring somebody new into that core, and we'll see what they end up doing with it. The nice thing is, the next team also has a goaltending issue here in the fact that we'll be talking about the Edmonton Oilers and Jack Campbell, the Soup Man. The Soup Man sucked this year. I think
Yep.
he even sucked in the AHL. And yeah, I mean, he's so far. Oh, wow. I did not know it was this bad, actually. In his 2 years with Edmonton, Campbell has had an 8.86 save percentage in 41 appearances.
Yeah.
Wow. I didn't realize it was that terrible. I think the Oilers are very lucky that Stuart Skinner pretty much popped off out of nowhere here, because if
Yeah.
he didn't just make his appearance at the NHL level, they'd be in a very bad spot. And yeah, he's been an interesting guy
So,
to follow.
so here's it. Do you want some Jack Campbell? Not breaking news. This was a while ago. But
Yeah.
Jack Campbell relevant news. In the middle of the first round against LA was the first time he had gotten called up from the AHL since November.
Yep.
Um,
Well,
been in the AHL the entire season.
and that's mainly because Stuart
Um,
Skinner was not impressive in that first half of this series against LA. In the second half, he's solid. He looked a lot better. I still don't think he's anything better than an average goaltender, but he's good enough for this Edmonton team, which is what we've seen.
Yep. But Campbell has been, I mean, it's a albatross for contract too, where they paid him
yeah.
a boatload of money. And I think the thing with Campbell has always been where you can just like visibly see him getting in his own head, right?
Oh, yeah.
Where he will have
Well, he played
he's
in
a
Toronto.
streaky goalie.
Right? He
Yeah,
is
exactly.
the perfect
I think
goalie
it's
for
almost
a
the specter of Toronto.
Exactly. Actually, yeah, that's what I was about to say. He pretty much perfectly reflects all the same issues that Toronto has in the
Yeah.
fact, and which is exactly why it never seemed smart to give him that contract that the Oilers did, but
No.
the only reason it's worked out for them
Even
so
in
far,
Toronto.
they're paying their if you include all of their goaltenders, and I think we've brought this up multiple times, at least in the fact of whenever the rumor of Markstrom going there, that stupid one that's popped up every once in a while. Whenever that's come up, my argument has always been between their three goalies that they have kind of have rotated in, they're paying all of them, I think, like $10 million. Why would you want to add another 6 million on top of that? It just doesn't make any sense. And what we've seen so far is that obviously they probably don't need it. I think you just stick with Stuart Skinner in the future. Even if I'm not that high on him as a goaltender, I think it's still a better option than Campbell or even trading for Markstrom.
Well, how do you get out of Campbell's contract? I think
You
is the
don't.
big thing
You don't. You just let that
I think it was a
albatross of a
long
deal
time.
sit there because nobody wants him.
Yeah. It was a questionable decision at the time.
You know what?
Um,
If
but
somebody would have
he
wanted
had
him,
played up to
if somebody would have wanted
he
him,
had played up to
he
that
would have
level.
gone picked up off waivers.
Right. Like this year, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, that's
Siri just.
Did something happen? Are you good?
Shut up. I don't know if you can still hear me or not.
Yeah. You're a little glitchy. I was gonna say that's probably a good moment to move on here because I scrolled further down this list that we have going here. We really gotta get moving here. Florida Panthers, Aaron Ekblad. Do you want to try and do the 1 minute thing just for the memes?
Sure.
Okay.
Why not?
Here we go. 1 minute. Thoughts on Aaron Ekblad sucking?
Not necessarily that I have all that much to say about Aaron Ekblad this year. I believe he was kind of like this because if we're kind of going 1 minute as of now. I believe he was injured last year. Don't have time to fact check that, but I think coming off the injury was a big thing. I think in terms of him taking a step back. I think that would be the biggest thing. It's honestly not something that I've heard all that much about, which I could probably attribute to the fact that Florida as a team has just been so good that it would overshadow any struggles that he's had. I don't
Yes.
think that's for these good teams. It's kind of hard to find a disappointing player.
Nope, and I agree with that. Aaron Ekblad, incredible defenseman, very, very good. We've seen his talent multiple times. The big issue has always been injuries. And this is another season that has just quickly gone destroyed by injuries for him. And he'll absolutely bounce back. I've been very high on Ekblad ever since he's entered the league, and I still think that he has all the potential in the world to someday, as long as injuries don't derail that, win a Norris. And I fully am okay with making that prediction because I'm very high on him. Next one, LA Kings, Pierre-Luc Dubois. What could we say that has not already been said about this guy? Got an absolute stupid deal for a ridiculous amount of money that honestly, even at the time, did not look like a smart deal to be made. They made it anyway, and now the LA Kings are stuck basically paying this guy who I don't think ever had the potential to live up to that contract, this insane deal. So to be honest with you, I do think he is a better player than 40 points in 82 games, but I don't think he's better than maybe 70. So that is what I'd say. I expect him to get back there, but past that, no.
That trade, like, it was a clear loss because I think that trade just revitalized the Jets too. Like I think it's a big reason why they had the season that they did is the return they got for Dubois, and now the conversation around Dubois is just because when you're giving up that much, you're expecting him to be a superstar, and I don't think he's ever been that. There's been potential for that, but he's never been that. Now the conversation is will they buy him out or not?
Yeah.
They say they won't, but even to be having that conversation is concerning.
Yeah, and those power forwards are really, really tough. We're running a little bit over a minute, but I'll say this right at the end. Power forwards like him are really, really tough to measure the potential of because so many of them are never really going to be those top scorers or like best players on the team unless they are really, really elite of a power forward, and he was never that type of talent. When I say really elite, I mean Jerome McGinley. I mean Joe Thornton. I mean those kind of players who are like all-time elite level players. Jamie Benn as another one to throw in there. And even I'd say he's the bottom that you can have to really be able to carry a team. And Dubois was never going to be that type of player. We can move on. Next one up here. I'll skip a few down. Nashville Predators in Saros. And this one's a really interesting one.
Oh,
because
I don't understand throwing that one up on the list. Like I didn't think he struggled.
Well, I mean, he had a worst year compared to what we're used to seeing of Saros. He still had a 906 save percentage, but I think a lot of people were still expecting him to have an elite season, and he didn't have that. I think he was really good in that first round series against Vancouver. Yeah, he was stellar. So I think in that sense,
doesn't change my opinion of him.
Yeah, exactly. I was about to say
some of these it is just kind of like you find not every most disappointing player is created equally, right? Because you have your Huberdeaus and your Jack Campbells, but Jack Campbell and Yusei Saros being on this list like kind of portrays them as being equal, but that really isn't the case here.
Yeah,
like he is a big reason why Nashville made it to the playoffs in the first place, right? Yeah. They were one of the worst teams in the league throughout the first month or two of the season, and you don't get to the point where they did without a good goaltender.
I firmly believe that pound for pound, Saros is one of, if not the best or most skilled goaltenders in the league. He is so talented for a goalie who stands at 5'11", and I think that I've always loved watching him play. I think he's so athletic. He's so, I don't know. I think out of all the goalies in the NHL, he's one of the most entertaining to watch. I fully think he'll bounce back. I've been a big fan of him for a while, so yeah, I'm excited to see what he does. At least next season. I think as long as Nashville even retains a little bit of the team they've had this last season and skill and performance, I think he'll easily bounce back. Okay, this one's a little bit of a bigger one, I'd argue. I mean, although it's the same sort of argument that you can make here, it's a very similar conversation is what I mean. Sorokin with the New York Islanders. He was very, very elite and very incredible throughout for like 2 years in a row. And this season there was a big drop off, and he ended up losing his starting job in the playoffs to Varlamov.
Yeah.
So I'm just
feels a lot bigger than the Saros stuff.
Really? Okay. Why?
Just in terms of what you just said, in terms of him losing his starting spot to Varlamov in the playoffs. I think a couple of years ago that was like pretty much unthinkable. Where he was being spoken about in almost the same breath as like Saros and Shesterkin. It was starting to look like that almost.
Well, he was
But
that. Not even
to
looking like it. He was that.
yeah. He was that for like you said, a year or two,
Yeah.
and to it's almost to the point where I think because again I wasn't as locked in on the NHL this year. It was just like it just kind of came as a shock to me. It's like Sorokin isn't starting. Like what
Yeah.
hame to him?
And
It's much more of a
I
noticeable
also
thing.
I also want to point out the fact that a big reason behind that is because of he still had a season save percentage of 908 to really put
Yeah,
something on top of it, which isn't bad, but compare it to the 924 that he had the season before, it's a pretty that's more hefty, right? And I think
yeah,
a lot of the reason behind him losing that starting job was the fact that Varlamov was playing very well. And I don't know if I don't know. I've always been a big fan of Sorokin. I think it's just he needed a down year, like every other goaltender. Just like Vasilevsky had a down year, right? Whether that be because of injuries or what have you. It's you can go down the list of all these elite goaltenders who haven't played as well this season. Out of all of them, for example, Saros, Sorokin, I'd put both of them on the same board of I fully expect Sorokin to bounce back. No issue. I think he's
yeah.
so
Not saying that
insanely
not
talented.
saying that he doesn't.
Yeah.
I just think this one is more noticeable than, or more significant than something like Saros. Not saying I don't think he'll bounce back, just because I think the position is so volatile in general.
Yes. Yeah. I think we can move on. The next one here is another one that if we weren't doing the minute thing, I probably would have sat here and talked about it for 10 minutes because I think it's so crazy. Is Capo Caco for the New York Rangers, who didn't have a very good season despite the fact that and everyone, even I remember, you got to think of the hype with this kid, right? When he first got drafted, he was basically shined up to be one of the top two players of the future with the Rangers, in him and Lafreniere. They were going to
Yep.
be the future for the Rangers, and neither of them have really been that incredible. And I think
Yeah,
I don't have Kako's stats in front of me. I might try and find them real quick. All I
I'll
know.
find him. I've got them.
Oh, do you?
Kako had. Oh boy, how bad was he? He had in 61 games, 13 goals, 6 assists, 19 points.
Yeah, rough. And I think, considering the expectations for him going into the league as the next great real sniper, right? Like, you got to think about it like that. He was expected to basically come in and shoot the lights out, and has never scored more than 18 goals is just insane. I think people have just been waiting for him to show up, and I still have hope. He's still young. He's still got time. But the window's closing, I think. At least time-wise.
Yeah. It's crazy how the Rangers were able to do as well as they have this season, and just in general in the last couple of years, with their young players not necessarily working out to the extent people
Oh, it
thought
just
they
shows
would.
the veteran team that they have.
Yeah, it's a great team, and imagine how good because they won the I mean they won the President's Trophy, but think of how much better they would even be with those players working
Oh
out.
my god.
And I mean, I think that not to give props to Lafreniere, I think he's slowly been improving his game. Even this year, he played a full season, 57 points, not anything world breaking, but not anything terrible either. I think
Yeah.
he's been slowly improving, but certainly not up to what you would expect yet of a first overall pick. I think
No.
you're right for
And the
both
hype.
Kako and Lafreniere.
He
And hype.
was he
I
was
think
probably the most hyped up first round pick or first overall pick since McDavid.
I
And maybe Matthews.
yeah, that was that. Yeah, well, that I think was more of a you thing too. I think you were the person I was like,
Oh, I
you
was
were the
so high
highest
on
on
him.
Lafreniere out of yeah.
Well, because everything.
This kid's the next
Everything.
McDavid. Like this.
Well, no, I never said McDavid. I said Crosby. That's what I said. Because I want to make the difference
Oh wow,
between the two of them clear.
oh yeah, that's
Because
okay,
the
there we
reason
go.
I said that is because when going into I could fight this till the day I die because as a prospect he was so fucking fun to watch. He was so good. He had his hockey IQ just seemed like it was absolutely insane. Like, and it's at least to me when I look at when I want to name a prospect that shows that nobody is a sure thing, Lafreniere is that guy. because as a prospect, he looked like a sure thing. He looked like that guy that was going to come into the league and just instantly dominate because he didn't have the issue of being small for the NHL level. Had the size, no issue there. He had the head for it. He absolutely had that hockey IQ to instantly come into and he had the team. The Rangers were, I believe, they had just started to really stack up that veteran talent. So at least for me, it really sucks to see he never turned it around. And like you pointed out, he's slowly gotten better, but he's shown that he's not quite the talent we, especially me, thought he was going to be. But yeah, we can keep moving on here. Let's. Do you feel like talking about Jacob Chychrun in Ottawa?
I don't know how much I can say on Chychrun. Like,
okay. The next one is probably Vasilevsky with Tampa.
yeah,
He's more interesting just in the fact of obviously injuries played a huge part in it. Before this season, he had been the one goalie that had really never had like a misstep in his career so far. Like I remember I think we compared him to like Hellebuck in that sense a little bit when we were talking about Hellebuck potentially getting moved, in the sense of in a position that is so volatile and there's so much movement in who is
those
elite
were the
and
two
who isn't.
guys.
Those were the two guys, and this was the first season that we saw Vasilevsky really take a misstep. And funnily enough, Hellebuck in the playoffs took his misstep, if you really want to look at it like that.
Yeah, although according to him, it's the best hockey he's ever played in his career.
That was a weird statement for him to make, but
Yeah.
because it really didn't look it. But anyway, this is the type of thing where I immediately go, cool. He wasn't good this year. He'll be good for the next 10 years.
Yeah.
And I think if you were to come out and say anything otherwise, I would call you an idiot. And I think it's as simple as that.
Yeah. If I am to play devil's advocate to it a little bit, I don't think
Okay.
I can only go so far with this take because I don't think Vasilevsky's going to.
I think I know the exact take you're going to make. Go nuts.
But I think that it will almost it'll be like he will still play well, but this Tampa team in general, I think, is on a downswing because now you don't know what's going to happen with Stamkos. That whole core is kind of falling apart, and I just could see Vasilevsky kind of fade into the background of more so as the team starts missing the playoffs. Not necessarily that he'll get worse,
I don't
but
know about that.
like it'll be clear that the peak of his career was behind him. That is my devil's advocate take.
Okay,
You know
what's so funny? I thought you were going to go further with that by saying that because Tampa's defense and overall team will be a lot worse next year, he might not bounce back as much. I thought that's what you were going to say, which I would argue by simply saying, no. That's not going to happen. I don't think out of all the goalies in the league, I would argue Vasilevsky is one of, if not the only one that I fully believe can carry an incredibly mediocre Tampa team to the playoffs as long as they have something.
Yeah.
Like, I think that he's just that kind of goalie, and I think he has shown me nothing. I don't care what happened this year until anything else happens otherwise to show me otherwise. That's just the side I'll be on, because I think he's probably the most talented goalie, if not maybe top 2, top 3. And if that's a controversial statement to you, then I'm sorry, but I don't think it shouldn't be. Yeah, I don't think it should be. The next one is kind of the opposite. I have the opposite opinion on this one. Toronto Maple Leafs, Ilya Samsonov. I feel like this wasn't surprising at all.
This is my problem with this list in general. Yeah.
Yeah, this wasn't
I don't think
surprising.
That was disappointing at all. I mean, if you go for the Leafs, I mean, I don't necessarily. I guess I can't pick anybody off the top of my head that had a more disappointing season. You could Marner in the playoffs, maybe. I don't know.
I thought Morgan Riley had a bit of a down year. I could be wrong.
Even then, I don't know how many people were expecting Samsonov to be any good. Like,
yeah.
I mean, it's kind of the thing. It's the same thing where it's just like career backup kind of thrust into the starting role.
Yes.
I think you always have to be
no.
a little bit kind of hesitant in that regard. I don't know.
Oh no, he didn't.
I
Morgan Riley didn't.
Yeah, I think even the most optimistic Leafs fans would have had some doubts about Samsonov going into the year. I don't know. I think I even compare that to what they did the year before that in like Matt Murray, where I think that was more of a fiasco, and that could be classified as way more of a disappointment compared to what the expectations were before the start of the year. Samsonov was just like, he was okay. Like, Samsonov wasn't bad, I don't think. He was
They
okay. Like, he's very mediocre, and that's, if you had expectations higher than that, I think you needed to readjust your expectations.
Yes. And I remember when Samsonov first came into the NHL, and there was a lot of hype behind him to become one of the next elite goaltenders. He was the big reason Holtby left the Capitals, right? Because the Capitals wanted to make room for him. And then obviously for the Capitals, he was good-ish. He was fine. He was never elite. He was good enough, right? And he came to Toronto, and he was good enough, right? I think that is what I describe him as for the most part. Like I said in our Toronto segment that'll be right before this, and for anybody watching this, just the segment alone, you can find that on the YouTube channel. Whoa. But I'll say the same thing. I'll just echo myself in the fact that I just think Toronto needs a better goaltender as a whole. I think they should be that team looking for an elite goaltender, because that is the one thing that they really just haven't had. They have had great defense. They've had great offense. They've never had elite goaltending in all the years they've contended. Yeah. I think if they are going to change anything, it should probably be that. We can move on though, unless you. Yeah. Okay. This next one is a very interesting one. I actually did not follow his season this year, but thinking about it makes a lot of sense because of the season he had before and all the hype that was around him with the Kraken in Matty Beniers, who had a quite major sophomore slump after the rookie season he had, in 15 goals, 37 points. I don't think I heard his name all season long, and I guess I just didn't think about it. But yeah, he very much fell off. I mean, it's not that bad. It's not a bad situation. There's a reason that the sophomore slump has kind of been trademarked in pretty much every league, because it's a lot easier as a rookie to come in and not really be the big. There's not a lot of expectations, right? Like, whether it is just a score, you're not being expected to be the thing that drags your team to the playoffs. And then when you have that good year, you come back the second year, you know what the expectations are. And he didn't meet them this year. That's the obvious thing. Yeah. But I think he'll turn it around. He's very, very talented. I'm sure you've probably watched more Kraken hockey than I have, especially in that first season. But I don't know. At least to me, whenever I've heard his name, I've always thought that he was gonna be a pretty good player, and I don't know. This season doesn't change that.
It was, again, like you said, it's a sophomore slump. I don't think there's, like you just said, I don't think that changes that. I think as for the Kraken as a whole this year, it was kind of a regression to the mean. Like, I think last season was a bit of an aberration in terms of the roster wasn't as talented as the Colorado team, but they still beat them in the first round.
Yeah.
And they still competed against, like, I believe it was Dallas. Like, they had a very good postseason run. And while I still think they're a good team, I think this is kind of more so what you would expect from them, where they still are a recent expansion team. They still don't necessarily have that superstar player. In terms of talent, Beniers might be that guy, because otherwise you're looking at guys like Jared McCann as your point leaders. And they don't have near the talent as Matty Beniers, but I do think it's just about trying to surround him with more talent. As the seasons kind of pile on here, to say, like, keep building, like, keep going. Like, he's a young player. I think he'll get better. It's a sophomore slump. It's not something I'm going to read into all that much. And you just hope they get back to the place they were a year ago.
Yeah. No, and I do agree with you on that one. I think he's probably the last real interesting one that I would say we need to highlight. The last other one that I'd really... You know what? We'll talk about this one real quick. Minute. Aiden Hill, Vegas Golden Knights. That's probably the last one.
That's an interesting one.
It is an interesting one, because a big part of it, I believe, was injuries, right? Because I think he did get hurt at some point there, if I remember right. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm not reading anything about injuries here, so maybe I am wrong. Maybe I'm talking out of my ass. Who knows? But what I will say is, obviously, he did have a drop-off, which should have been expected, I think. Especially just when you look at it as he was a goalie who really was only exceptional in the playoffs for Vegas. And a big part of that could be attributed to how good of a defense Vegas overall has. So at least to me, when I look at this, I would say I was definitely on the side of that I still expected Aiden Hill to be a very good player this season. I didn't think he'd drop off as much as he did, but it doesn't surprise me that it happened.
He wasn't necessarily bad. Save percentage 9.
No.
.909.
But who else
goals
would you point
against
out
that,
on Vegas? Right?
in terms of
Being disappointing. Other than maybe like
yeah.
Mark Stone.
I think that's the thing. And in terms of like expectation, because disappointment all about, like we've talked about this whole segment, expectations versus actual.
Yes.
The expectations couldn't have been higher because of the playoff run, right? Like where the hype was just so high. It's not necessarily like with some of these other goalies. I'm like, really, what did you expect? I'm like,
Yes,
that's fair that
absolutely.
you expected that, but I don't think it was ever possible to live up to the amount of hype, even if those expectations at the time seemed realistic. And I also think it is important to note that it can seem like he took a step back just because he's shared the crease more with another really good goalie in Logan Thompson.
Yeah. And we knew that was going to be
the
thing going into this year as well. In the goaltending competition
yeah, exactly.
between the
Like
two
that's
of them.
not necessarily unexpected. The only reason Logan Thompson wasn't playing more of the playoffs is because he got hurt.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. No, absolutely. I think that's it. I don't think we need to talk about the other guys. It's Darcy Kemper with the Capitals, which, I mean, he just played bad. I never was that high on Kemper as a whole. And Logan Stanley with the Winnipeg Jets, which is a very funny one to me because I never would have thought to see him on a list like this because honestly, I don't remember the last time I would have even heard his name. So there you go. That is it. That is our coverage of all the most disappointing players in the NHL this year. I don't know how to wrap this up really because there wasn't really a big lesson to take from this other than the fact that I hope that Jonathan Gaudreau turns things around.
Yeah.